Welcome everybody to Contracting Business Basics Learning Module number 5, Legal Issues. I'm your host, Lori Rawlings, Executive Director of the Plumbing and Mechanical Contractors Association of Oregon, Southwestern Washington, and Northern California. And we are going to be digging into some issues relating to attorneys and other legal things today. So I'm happy to turn it over to our instructor today, Hank Brancasio. Hank, welcome.
Thanks, Lori. Glad to be back again. Today we'll, as the screen indicates, we're going to do legal issues today. You know, I hate to say this, but I have hired attorneys, fired attorneys, dealt with corporate attorneys, dealt with outside attorneys. At one point, I thought I had my attorney on speed dial because I talked to him so much. But it's a challenging piece for somebody who's not familiar with it. But we'll see if we can help everybody get through this today and give them some tidbits of information to hire an attorney, to understand what your position is in hiring an attorney and what makes up a good attorney, because not all attorneys are good. Okay, some objectives today. Again, I just mentioned this. Good legal advice and bad legal advice, it's not always the same. I think a lot of people have this premonition that, oh, they're an attorney, they went to law school, they must be a really, really good attorney. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Just like you can have a bad plumber, you can have a bad attorney, and that can cost you a lot of money. Just like a bad plumber would cost you a lot of money. So we'll talk about that. Talk about some critical business issues when you need to call an attorney or legal advice. Now, you can call them all the time. They'll be more than happy to take your phone call, but it gets pretty darn expensive when they're billing out at $300, $400, $500 an hour. You can run up an expensive legal bill pretty rapidly if you're not careful. So you have to be able to understand, when do I really need to call the attorney, and how much can I get through that on myself? How much can I interpret what's in a specification or a document or an issue and straighten it out? Understand basic corporation structure. So if you're setting up a company or business, or even if you're buying a business, it's good to understand what are your options. We're not going to provide information that tells you should have this kind of a corporation, but we will tell you a little bit of the difference between them and give you some direction as to where to go, because it's not that straightforward sometimes. And then finally, to understand important issues that may be in a contract, you will begin to review contracts on a regular basis. If you're starting a contracting business or taking over a contracting business, you need to understand where are the important things. There's a lot of stuff in a contract that's not very important, but there's a lot of stuff that's very critical and could cost you money if you miss it.
And that here would be a nice time for us to provide our standard disclaimer that we're not providing you with legal advice today. We're giving you a 30,000 foot overview of some things that you need to keep in mind. But for specific issues dealing with contracts, corporate structure, things like that, you really need to have your own attorney and consult with your attorney on those particular issues.
Point well taken, Lori. What defines good legal advice for a business? So, this is from 35 years of experience of doing this. And I break it down into 3 components: expert subject advice, looking for value and availability. So the first one is expert subject advice. This becomes an issue because it seems that nowadays everybody knows an attorney. Everybody knows, oh, I know Billy Bob, he's an attorney, he helped me out with this. Well, in business, you have such specialty, and so you might be using somebody for collections, may not be the right person to handle HR issues. And a mistake, meaning somebody who only does collections and is not willing to say to you, oh, I can, I don't think that's a good idea if I handle it, can get you in a lot of trouble. So look for a firm with some diversification, meaning a firm that has maybe 2 or 3 attorneys at a minimum would help. I always found that having 10 to 15 attorneys gave you some diversification. I might still have a single point of contact, but then they would be like, okay, this is an HR issue. We're going to give you Bob. Bob's an HR person. Or this is a different type of an issue, an insurance claim issue. I'm going to give you Sam. Sam's going to be it. So you want to look for expert and subject advice. And I would say if you've got one law firm and they've got one attorney or two attorneys, don't be afraid to have two law firms. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with having a second or third law firm for different reasons. And so you're going to call law firm number two if there's an HR issue, but if there's a collection or money issue, you're going to call law firm number one. Again, expert subject advice really, really helps. This is a good one. So I always say good legal advice is expensive. Now, I've had people that work for me, they went cheap. Oh, I got this attorney that would send out letters for collections and he only charges $35 a letter, blah, blah, blah. And here's what would happen. I never collected any money. So it was cheap. It was $35, but I never collected any money. And so I cut that off. I'd rather spend $150 on an attorney or $250 and collect my money than to go cheap. So you want to look for value. More than likely, unless you're a really big mechanical contractor, you probably can't afford the best attorney in your market. There's a lot of attorneys in every market. You probably can't afford somebody who bills out at $400 or $500 an hour all the time. So look for value. Look for somebody that maybe it's a little less than that, but they provide good value, good service for you. I've done it both ways. And I would tell you, running up a $25,000 legal bill on any particular subject can happen pretty darn fast when you're billing out at $400 or $500 an hour. The last line here, or the second to last line, despite doing everything right, you're going to need an attorney at one point. Stuff happens. I mean, that's my great line, is just stuff happens. And so you might be doing everything right. You're following the letter of the law. You're dotting your I's. You're crossing your T's. You're doing everything you're supposed to do. And you still end up in a legal dispute. It happens. Stuff happens. So availability, the ability to pick up the phone and call that attorney at 5 o'clock in the evening and get them on the phone, it's a big plus. The idea that I called my attorney 3 days ago and I still haven't heard back, that's not the right attorney. I mean, that's just bad all the way around. They have got to be available. And keep this in mind, you're running a business. When you run a business, different from being a plumber or a steam fitter or a sheet metal worker, if that's what you're doing, or a sprinkler fitter, when you're a fitter, you're available from 6:30 in the morning, maybe until 3:30 in the afternoon, and you go home. But when you're running a business, the phone calls never stop. And so I've gotten phone calls at 10 o'clock at night from customers. I've gotten them on Saturdays. I've gotten them on Sundays. You've got to have an attorney that's available to you when you need them. And so availability is important, along with the other two items there. And the final item there, remember, not all attorneys are good or right for your business. They might be a good attorney, but they may not understand your business, or you've got an attorney that's great for HR issues and they're terrible at collecting money. You want to understand that. And obviously collecting money, seems like I used an attorney a lot for that, but I've been involved with a lot of different issues with attorneys. I've been in mediation, arbitration, litigation. I've sat in court, all of that stuff. Not all attorneys are right for your business, and not all attorneys are good, despite the fact that you're getting a bill at $400 an hour. So just kind of keep that in mind from that standpoint.
Yeah. Exactly. And a couple points to make on those last two bullet points there, Hank. Despite doing everything right, there will be times when you need a good attorney. I would say that's going to be especially true whenever you are contemplating firing somebody or taking some kind of severe adverse employment action against someone. You really, really should consult with an attorney before you do something like that, because making a mistake in that realm can get very expensive very quickly. And something to keep in mind when you're running a union mechanical contracting business, there are two different areas of law involved. There's employment law, and then there's labor law, and they're two separate types of law. And most attorneys only practice one or the other. And yet, if you are contemplating some kind of action with one of your union represented people, you're going to need to understand both the employment law and the labor law implications. So you really need to find good attorneys who understand each body of law. Sometimes you get lucky and you find a labor attorney who also practices employment law. It's really rare to find an employment lawyer who also practices labor law. So just keep that in mind. Those are things to think about.
Listen, I don't want to paint the picture that attorneys don't do a good job, because I will tell you, a good attorney is worth their weight in gold. Simple as that. They will collect money for you. They will defend you. They will keep you out of trouble. And most attorneys will tell you, when you don't call them until you're going down for the last breath, you should have called me 2 weeks ago. I mean, that's a common thing you will hear from it. Oh, why didn't you call me? I could have saved you a lot of money. And that's true. I think sometimes what happens is people look at an attorney and go, well, they're expensive. Boy, I don't want to spend $1,000 on a couple of phone calls. I'll just try to handle it myself. And that $1,000 can morph into 10,000 extremely quickly, particularly when, the example of the HR, I'm going to fire this person and I've had it, and you fire them and then you make some critical mistakes. You didn't fire them properly. You didn't really have grounds to fire them. And it starts to go down a rat hole, so to speak. And by the time you call the attorney, it's too late. And now it gets very, very expensive. So get a good attorney or attorneys. Don't be afraid to call them, but be diligent in understanding when I need to call them, because sometimes calling them earlier, even though it costs you some money, it probably will save you in the long run. And I will say this, just to kind of set the table here with the whole attorney discussion, again, because I've had good and I've had bad attorneys. Lori, by trade, you're an attorney, and I have a daughter that's an attorney. So it's not like I have not been around attorneys. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And we'll keep plugging through these legal issues. I've always found attorneys to be fun to work with when they're really good attorneys, because when they're defending you and helping you, they're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, and as somebody who practiced law for more than a decade, I wholeheartedly agree with Hank. There are good attorneys and there are bad attorneys, and you need to make sure you find a good one, because a bad one can really mess things up. So I'm not going to just defend all attorneys as, they're all the same, they're all great. They're not. You really need to do some digging. And like we've mentioned in previous episodes, don't be afraid to ask other contractors, hey, who do you use for this kind of issue? Because I really need a good attorney
And
to help me out with collections, labor, whatever.
I'm going to bring up an example of the good attorney, bad attorney situation. And Lori knows this because I was sitting on the board of the Mechanical Contractors Association in Milwaukee. Lori was working for the board at the time. And the subject came up about an attorney the board had used in labor issues for years. I mean, 15 years, I think we had used this attorney. Everybody kept saying, he's really a good attorney. And I remember bringing this up at the meeting, like, have we ever won one of these cases? Have we ever won something? And everybody kind of like looked around the room and said, come to think of it, I don't think we've ever won. 15 years, we've never won. And I said, well, I don't think we're losing anything if we change attorneys, because we're old for whatever. We've never won. It might be time to go get another attorney. And we did. We switched, and it was a great switch. And so just kind of food for thought, that don't be afraid to go, this isn't working out for whatever reason. I'm going to go look for another attorney, from that standpoint. So first thing up on the list, where do I find a good attorney? This is not the time to go through the yellow pages, and it sure isn't the time to watch the ads on TV and go, hey, this guy who's a great injury lawyer. This is not the time to pick those people. This is not, let me thumb through the yellow pages. Let me go out on Yelp and I'll see if I can find something. You want firsthand knowledge of the performance of an attorney. So talk to your partners, talk to your banker, talk to your insurance agent, talk to your accounting, talk to your bonding agent, talk to people that know people in your market to understand. Give me some suggestions. Go interview these people. Nobody says you have to like, oh, he gave me a suggestion of Acme Law Firm. I'm going to go hire them. Well, maybe they were right for somebody else, but they're not right for you. So don't be afraid. Get 2, 3, 4 references of each attorney you talk to. Go interview these folks and go from there. Because just keep this in mind. Just like you're trying to win business with a hospital, the attorney's trying to win clients as well. And talk with other subcontractors. Listen, again, all established contractors have attorneys, good ones and bad ones. Don't be afraid to go talk to other people in the industry. Talk to general contractors. Talk to other subcontractors. Maybe there's a drywall or an insulator that uses an attorney, and they may say, oh, this guy's a really good attorney. So get some good information from that standpoint. I will tell you that the attorney I ended up using at the mechanical I was running for collecting money, I met at a seminar put on by my insurance agent. So I went to the seminar and listened to this attorney speak. And for whatever reason, we just hit it off, the two of us. I think we ended up going out for beers. I eventually ended up hiring him. And to this day, I believe that attorney is still used by the mechanical contractor in Milwaukee. So I don't be afraid to branch out a little bit. Oh, there's a seminar that somebody's putting on. There's an attorney speaking at the seminar. Maybe it's a seminar on terms and conditions. Maybe it's a seminar on what to sign and what not to sign. Go to the seminar, sit through the seminar. It'll be well worth your hour to listen to an attorney, because you may find one, oh, I don't like this guy at all, or this woman, I'm taking them off the list, or wow, what this seems to be the right person for me. So don't be afraid to do that. You know, my last line on here is only because people tend to do this. Oh, I have a friend, I have a cousin that's an attorney, and I'll hire them. Well, that doesn't make it right for your business. It just doesn't. You got to find out what that person does. And so, as my last sentence there says, legal advice doesn't always make it good advice. I think some people look at attorneys who went to law school, they're very highly paid, which is true. They're very smart people, but that doesn't make it right. And it doesn't make it always the best advice for you. So be aware of that, because again, they can cost you a lot of money if they're wrong. Be aware of that. You want to try to find the right attorney or attorneys that can help you run your business. And that is a balance between good legal advice and value legal advice. I mean, you can go to the best attorney in your marketplace and probably get pretty good legal advice, but it could cost you $100,000. So you don't want that. On the other hand, you don't want an attorney that gives you crappy legal advice and it only costs you $800. That's not the solution either. So you got to look for that balance. And only you can tell that through some interviews, through talking to other people, get some references. I will tell you that the attorney I was using in Milwaukee for a lot of my stuff, I was at a professional organizations meeting, ran into an electrical contractor I knew who said to me, oh my God, where did you get this attorney from that you're using? He's kind of over the top, blah, blah, blah. Like 3-4 months later, I run into the same electrical contractor at another meeting in town. And he's like, hey, I can tell you this. I hired your attorney to help me collect money because he's really good. And I said, well, that's why I use him, because he is really good. And he might be a little brash and he might be a little different than you would see in most attorneys, but he always got me my money. And that's when you're running a business, again, going back, we're going to talk about this at some point, cash is king. And so you want to make sure that you understand that.
Yeah, and just a couple other points on, picking the right attorney for you and for the right type of issue. Think about attorneys like doctors. Attorneys specialize in the same way that doctors do. So, for example, if you were having a problem, you had an ear infection, you're not going to go to like an orthopedic surgeon for that, right? You're going to go to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. Same thing with an attorney. If you are having a problem, you're thinking about terminating an employee, don't go to your collections attorney for that. And vice versa, don't go to your labor and employment attorney for collections. They specialize. It's kind of the same thing. Like people in the trades, they specialize too. There are electrical workers who have no idea how to do plumbing and vice versa. So just remember that it's not a one size fits all type of thing. And I also like the point that Hank made about, the most expensive attorney in town is not always the best attorney in town. That story he referred to earlier about changing attorneys at our association in Milwaukee, he was really expensive. And we changed to an attorney who charged us probably at least $100 less per hour. And that attorney ran circles around our old attorney. We've won every case we've ever had with the new attorney. He still charges us less than we were paying the old attorney. And he's so good that I continue to use him here out on the West Coast, even though he's located in the Midwest, because labor law is federal law and he's just the best. So it may take some time to find the right fit. Don't assume the most expensive attorney is the best. Really, really dig in and do some research by talking to other people. And by the way, I found that guy through a sister association in Madison, Wisconsin. They were using him for their labor matters, and that's how I found him. So talk to other contractors.
So legal issues, where do I begin if starting a new business? So let's just talk about the people that are starting a business. There are 3 different types of corporations you can set up. One is known as a C Corp, one is known as an S Corp, and one is an LLC. We're not going to tell you which one to do in this little brief video, but we will point out a couple of things. So there are 3 different types. You need to understand that they're different. As it says, from a liability standpoint, you need to form a corporation if you are small or limited employees. Don't do this without forming a corporation. You're in a risky business, the construction and contracting business, probably one of the more riskier businesses out there. Do not do this without forming a corporation, or you run the risk of that risk going on to you personally and your personal assets. So that's number 1 on my hit parade. Number 2, each of those configurations, C Corp, S Corp, LLC, have different tax implications, and they may have different legal aspects or implications. Go talk to a tax advisor. Go talk to an attorney. Figure out what's the best thing for the business you're creating or starting. Don't assume, well, Acme Mechanical down the road or Bill down the road, he started his own plumbing business and he did an LLC. I'm going to do an LLC. Don't assume that. Go gather information and understand from a tax advisor, which is an accounting firm or an accountant, and a legal advisor as to what makes the most sense for doing this, and find an attorney that sets up companies. Don't find, just because you're, the guy setting up the company might not be the same attorney used for other purposes. So I would tell you that there are different implications. Again, we're not going to tell you, oh, you should go do a C Corp. That's not the right solution. You need to do a little research, get some good advice, and determine what makes the most sense for your configuration, your business that you're starting. I've got something on this slide that talks about credibility among your customers. And that's on here because if you're working in a hospital, and I'll pick on a hospital, or a large office building, and you're a C Corp or an S Corp, they won't even bat an eye. It just says, Acme Mechanical Corporation. Got it. But if you're an LLC sometimes within our industry would be like, why are you only a LLC? Why aren't you a regular corporation? Because you're competing with people that all are S Corps and C Corps mostly, for the most part. So just something to keep in mind, that there is an implication sometimes if you're an LLC that would be, why are you an LLC? Why aren't you a regular corporation? And so it's much cheaper to set up an LLC. But again, get with an attorney, get with a tax advisor, before going down this path, and be aware of, once you set these corporations up, you might have some responsibility to the state you're working in to register it with the state. Again, your tax advisor and your attorney will help you with this, and they'll point you what you need to do from a state standpoint to get registered, and maybe pay a fee to the state and make sure that that registration is maintained on a yearly basis. Okay, so we talked a little bit about, where do I find an attorney? So now let's spin this forward a little bit, and let's say you have an attorney. And so now, okay, when do I call my attorney? Well, how often do I call my attorney? So here's the deal. You can call your attorney as much as you like. Every time you get a contract, you can call your attorney, but that gets very expensive very, very fast. When I was new in the industry and I was working for Johnson Controls, and I would get contracts from large general contractors around the country sometimes, I would call the attorney that were the corporate attorneys. And they would be just a hoot, because they would say, hey, don't sign that contract. That's like a really bad contract. Well, I learned over time, like, you know what? I'm going to call them, but I would paraphrase my question as to, Bill, I'm signing the contract. So now tell me, what are the things I need to change in the contract, or what are the things I need to watch out for? But I'm signing this contract because it's $1 million contract at a big hospital, and it just happens to be an out-of-state large contractor. You need to point out to me what I need to get changed or focus on. Don't tell me not to sign it. So I think you need to find a balance with your attorney. When do I call them? Just keep in mind, it gets real expensive real fast. You can call them all the time, but get ready for big bills from that standpoint. The second item, I know a lot of you watching this would go, why would I ever do work without a signed contract? I'm sure there are people like, oh, that doesn't make, what? I'm not that stupid. I would never do it. Let me tell you something. When I ran a mechanical contractor, I had 6 to 8 people selling work for me, bidding and selling work. People with 20, 30, 40 years of commercial construction experience, guys that came out of the trades or guys that have been doing this a long time. And you cannot believe how many of them would be like, oh, we started on this job, but I don't have a contract yet. And I'd be like, what? And it'd be like, stop. We're going to go get a contract or a signed purchase order or a letter of intent. Do not proceed with work unless you have something signed. Now, I get it. You might say, I've been working for this guy for 20 years. Well, let me tell you something. Handshakes can be forgotten at the end of a job. It's one thing to start a job, meaning I'm going to mobilize. I'm not buying any material. I'm not writing any subcontracts. I'm not doing any labor on the job. I'm mobilizing. That's one thing. It's one thing for somebody to say, well, it's going to take a couple of weeks for our purchasing department to cut you an order. Well, that's great. Well, do me a favor. I'm going to send you over a letter of intent. Will you please sign it and send it back to me so that at least I have something in writing? Now, that letter of intent could be an email. Keep this in mind from a liability standpoint. You start work and you don't have a contract, and you send somebody out to a construction job and they get hurt, you got a mess on your hands because you have no legal contract now. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You could order material, and then for whatever reason, something blows up, and next thing you know, you're not doing the job anymore, and you're out $50,000 in material. And I know what you're thinking. Nobody would do that to me. It's happened. It's happened to me when I got involved too late and realized, you did what? You ordered $50,000 in material. We don't even have a contract yet. So please, I cannot stress this more. And if you call an attorney, they will tell you this also. Do not proceed on a project unless you have a signed contract. That's the best thing I could do from that standpoint. Don't be afraid if you get a signed contract to discuss any changes with the customer. Important aspects of these. And it could be nothing more than a simple email. Hey, Bill, please proceed with the plumbing work on the expansion of the East Wing. I will get you a contract in the next 10 days. You just need something in writing, because again, I'm telling you, handshakes can be forgotten. People have short memories when things go south quickly. And the next thing you know, it's like, oh, we decided to hire another plumber. What? What? I bought all the material. Oh, too bad. Shouldn't have done that. Keep that in mind.
Something else to keep in mind, don't sign a contract that's just boilerplate. There's no such thing as boilerplate. Everything is negotiable. You may not have the negotiating power that you would like with a general contractor, but don't accept the excuse that, we can't change that. It's our boilerplate. That's a bunch of baloney. At least ask
Absolutely.
if there's something that, is really going to be problematic for you. Ask to have it changed. Try to negotiate. You'd be surprised sometimes you'll actually get what you asked for or something in between. So make sure you read and understand what you're signing and ask for changes to make the contract less one-sided and a little more favorable to you than it is to the customer or to the general contractor.
So contracts will specify the following. They'll tell you how big the contract amount is. Now, I know this first one is like, well, this is a no-brainer. Why would they ever change it? Well, where it gets interesting is when you have a base job, base bid and a bunch of alternates, and then they write you a contract, and it says in there that this contract includes alternates 1, 3, and 5, but the contract amount is the base number. So it can happen, mistakes happen. So make sure that the contract amount, particularly if there were some extras quoted or alternates quoted or value engineering included, that it's the right amount. It should tell you when it is done by, a date. Now I know what some people might be thinking, the guy's pretty easygoing and he didn't put a date in there. You know what? I'd rather have a date. Even if it's a great customer that I've done a lot of work with, I'd rather have a date rather than, 3 months go by, you're not done with the project for whatever reason. And it's like, oh boy, this guy, it took him forever to get the job done. Get a date in there. It just saves everybody a lot of problems. There should be something in the contract that'll tell you when you have to submit your progress payment, your bill. Now, I've got on here an AIA progress payment. It'll tell you the form that it's got to be submitted on, and it'll usually say the 20th of the month or the 25th of the month. There's usually something in there when you have to bill. Why is that important? Because if you don't get the bill to them in time, they will delay your payment. And then we're back to this cash flow problem that we talked about previously. So please watch for those first 3. Then retainage. Now, let me explain what retainage is for anybody who may not know. Retainage means I'm going to hold back, if I'm the general contractor or the owner, I'm going to hold back a percentage of your bill. You bill me $10,000, I'm keeping $1,000, and I'm going to keep that $1,000 until you're done with the job. So let's say a job that takes 6 months. You bill the first bill, it's at $10,000. You only get paid $9,000. I'm keeping $1,000. By the end of that 6 months, and let's make life simple here. Let's just say you're billing $10,000 a month for 6 months, $60,000. At the end of the job, they're holding $6,000 of your money. And I will tell you, it may take you 6 months to get that money because they're going to hold that money until everyone usually on the job is done. Now, maybe the retention isn't 10%. Maybe it's only 5%. Or maybe when you're done with the job, if you're done with the job, maybe you could go back to the general or the owner and say, listen, I'm finished. I realize you got all the stuff that's going on. Why don't you reduce my retention by half? So you're holding 6,000, pay me 3 of the 6. And okay, then I can live with the last 3. So those are some things that come up that are built into the contract that you want to make sure you understand if you've never seen it before. And then finally, the last item on here, another piece that's usually in a contract, any disputes will go to binding arbitration. So there are 3 types of places disputes can go from a legal standpoint. We get into a dispute. Lori and I are doing a project. Lori's the general contractor. I'm the mechanical. We get into a dispute. We can't settle the dispute. In the contract, it says it goes to binding arbitration. So what What are the three options? Binding arbitration is one, or just arbitration. One is mediation and one is litigation. So litigation is the worst because that means we're going to court. We got to get an attorney. It's expensive, blah, blah, blah. Could take years. Binding arbitration, which is what I've noted here in a slide, means we go to an arbitrator, we sit in a conference room. I've got my attorney, Lori's got her attorney, and we both present our position. An arbitrator reviews everything and says, okay, I rule that Hank gets all the money. Or I rule Lori gets all the money. Or I rule it's 50-50. It's binding, meaning you can't dispute it. You can't go back and go, wait a minute, I don't agree with that. Tough luck. That's it. Final decision is made. It's fast, it's clean, and you hope that you get the right arbitrator. It's as simple as that. Mediation is kind of where we sit in front of a mediator. We do the same process, except that mediator works with Lori and me to try to settle it. And sometimes it gets settled and sometimes it doesn't get settled. If it doesn't get settled, then sometimes it could go to court. It goes to litigation. Different ways to handle it. You want to see what's in the contract so you understand, okay, if we get into a pissing match, if we get into a dispute, how is this going to get resolved? And that's important to understand. May not seem to be important on a $25,000 contract, but you get into $1 million contract, it could be big money, because if you are out $250,000 and it has to go to arbitration, it's a lot of money. Those are just a tidbit of things that are in a contract that you want to be watching for before you sign it and send it back. Okay. So Lori brought this up before. This one is your contract may be tied to a higher level contract. Almost all general contractors have language in their contract that ties you as a subcontractor to their contract with the construction manager or building owner or owner's rep. I guarantee it. It's in there somewhere. It may say, okay, the general contractor gets this $40 million project. You're doing a $200,000 piece of it. And it says that we, the plumbing contract, has to abide by whatever's in their contract, but they never give you their contract. That's the other hoot of the whole thing. It just says you're bound by it. Well, as you read it and don't sleep at night, you go, what did I just sign? What did I just sign my life away on? Because I'm tied to whatever. So don't be afraid. Lori brought this up earlier. Don't be afraid to say, oh, if you want me to sign this, I want a copy of your contract. Now, here's what happens. At that point there, the general might go, I don't want to give you my contract because they don't want you to see what's in their contract. How about I strike it? Fine, that's okay. Strike it. I don't want it in the contract. So it varies. I've had this come up multiple times with general contractors, and sometimes they're like, okay, I'll get you the contract. I'm going to black out my contract amount. And I'm like, that's fine. I don't need to see that. What I need to see is the language that's in that. So again, what Lori said, don't be afraid to ask for a copy of the contract or have it removed. You need to understand the working conditions and completion dates, and if liquidated damages or penalties can be assessed. So again, if you don't understand what this is, it says in the contract, it says this has to be done by August 30th. So let's take it a little step further. Complete all plumbing associated with class condition by August 30th. The next sentence might say, if work is not completed by August 30th, you will be assessed $100 a day in penalties or in liquidated damages for every day you miss. Or it could say you'll be assessed $1,000 a day. It can vary from contract. Why is that important to understand? Is it means you're doing a $25,000 contract, and you potentially, if you're not done by August 30th, you need to be sure that you don't start to get assessed damages on this contract. You see it a lot when buildings are being built or remodeled and they have to hit a date. Now, I've got a school in there because schools will tell you most of the time school's going to start September 1st. Let's just pick that as an example. So now if you're not done, it's a big deal. So you need to be sure you understand, are there penalties? Are there damages in there? What those penalties are? And you want to be sure that if you're being delayed. So let's say you were supposed to start in June. You have to be done by August 30th. You don't get started in June. There's a delay in the weather or whatever, and you don't get started until July 15th. Well, they're moving that date. It's still August 30th. That's what's in the contract. There's still penalties. You now need to define to them, hey, I got delayed by 30 days. I need to adjust this completion date, or I need to get damages removed, or whatever. Those are the type of things you would want to look at in a contract and make sure you get worked out with the general or the owner, so you don't end up with a problem at the end of the project. More contract language stuff. The more experience you gain, the better you become identifying this. I will tell you, when you first start reading contracts, you just have never seen this stuff and you feel like you're drowning. But over time, you'll start to know, all right, here's what I got to go to. Go to page 3 of the contract, item number 26. Oh yeah, there it is. Repetitive projects with the same owner or GC, you'll develop a familiarity. The more you do with a general contractor or an owner, the more you'll like, I know what's in this contract. I know what's been done in the contract. And I would tell you this much, if you're doing a lot of work with the same owner or general contractor or developer, get it fixed the first time. So now you can use that each time going forward. You don't have to rewrite these things every time, because you're like, oh, okay, let's have an addendum drafted that says these are the changes to this contract. Your attorney can help you with this if it's somebody you're doing a ton of work with. In red, be cautious of contracts with customers that you have not worked for before, or they are from out of town. It happens. Some people within your organization would think nothing of, oh, let's get this job. We're working for this general from wherever, somewhere on the other side of the country. You don't know this general. You've never worked with the general before. Be cautious, because now they're coming into your marketplace. They're going to do a project. You don't know if they're staying in your marketplace or if they're leaving immediately. Be cautious. Make sure those I's are double dotted and the T's are double crossed, because it could be a problem from that standpoint. I ended up getting into a dispute that I inherited when I took over this mechanical. Turned out the developer was from Florida. We were in Milwaukee. And the owner was, this one was from France. So, of course, we don't get paid. Of course, we started the job without a contract. I get into mediation and we got it settled. But I mean, we're on a conference call with some guy in France. We got a developer on the phone from Florida. I mean, what a mess. So I would tell you, if you're doing work with somebody that you just don't have any familiarity with, or they're from out of town, be really cautious before you go down. It may look like a good project and it may turn into a real mess. So just be aware of that. That kind of wraps up the legal stuff. Again, we're not trying to turn you into attorneys. We're not trying to give you legal advice. We're trying to point out the things you need to be familiar with. And again, the more you do of these, the more you sign and review, the better you will become with them. And don't be afraid if you're like, wow, I'm pretty good, but I'm not sure on this issue. Pick up the phone and call your attorney. It may cost you $500, but if you're trying to decide whether to sign $150,000 or $250,000 contract, what's $500? Because if you don't do it, it could cost you $50,000 on the back end.
Great advice, Hank. Excellent. Well, great. That wraps up legal issues, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the next learning module.
Great. Thanks, Lori.
Thanks, Hank.